Welcome to a special Pride Month edition of the Michelle Meow Show at the Commonwealth Club of California. I'm John Zipper, the club's Vice President of Media and Editorial, and Michelle's co-host for this program. We hope you are well and are staying safe. We have produced more than 550 online programs since the beginning of this pandemic, and will continue live streaming events to the world. But we're announcing our first in-person events in more than a year, including on July 1st, when Michelle and I will host our first in-person program featuring TikTok star Nick Cho, whose millions of followers know him as Your Korean Dad. So head over to commonwealthclub.org/MMS for all upcoming programs, plus podcasts and videos of past events. For those of you joining us for the first time, the Commonwealth Club is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to the civil discussion of important issues of the day. Any opinions expressed here are those of the speakers. And if you're watching us live on YouTube, use the chat box on YouTube to submit questions for our special guests today. And we want to give a thank you to Blue Shield of California for making today's important discussion possible. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Michelle Meow, the producer and host of The Michelle Meow Show and a member of the Commonwealth Club's Board of Governors. Good to see you again, Michelle.
Thank you so much, John, and you're right. I'm so excited about being able to have an in-person program again, but at the same time, I have some feelings about it, as I think a lot of us do too. What does opening up actually mean? How does it affect our community? So I'm glad you're all here today because we have an important conversation around LGBTQ mental health and recovery and resilience from a pandemic. I'm honored to introduce to you our panel tonight. It is David Bond, who's a licensed clinical social worker, board certified expert in traumatic stress, and director of behavioral health at Blue Shield of California. We also have T. Drake Smith, also known as Shorty, who's an artist, an activist, actor, youth coordinator at the Oakland LGBTQ Center, and also Juan Acosta, who's an LGBTQ mental health advocate and co-author of Channel Kindness. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I have not been shy as far as sharing even my own personal journey and how the pandemic has affected myself. I've lost all my hair and now recovering 6 months later, it's growing back a little bit, but that's just one way in which the pandemic had affected me. And so I think a good jumping point, a good point for us to start is checking in with each and every one of you as community leaders and how the pandemic may have affected your world. How did COVID-19, the pandemic, affect your world? Let's start with David.
I'm an extrovert and I cope with stressors by being social and being around lots of people. So that wasn't available to me anymore and had to find new ways to cope with stressors, which can be really, really frustrating for other people who are extroverted as well, even people who are introverted. I found that in the first few months, and granted, I'm a behavioral health person, my alcohol consumption increased. My fitness habits plummeted and my healthy eating habits plummeted. My television consumption went way up and I started being a TikTok scroller, which I think a lot of people kind of fell into that too. When we realized, oh, this isn't going to be a 2-week thing. It's not going to be a 2-month thing. Had to kind of like go meta and say, who is this person who makes these choices that didn't used to make these kinds of choices before, and have had to take a more of an active role in choosing health. At work, I think the biggest thing was, because I also work for managed care, is we have to make sure that everyone still has access to mental health services and healthcare services, even though things are shutting down. So how do we have to shift operations and maybe move to telehealth access and make sure that people know that they've got that? So there was quite a bit of flurry. And then I think as you get into like month 8 or so, that fatigue really sets in. It's like, I'm so tired of Zoom meetings. I've got that. It was like, at first it was cool. Like my mother's in her 70s, but she's kind of an old 70s, and like trying to teach people how to figure out some of this tech. And then you just get that, I even hear from millennials and Gen Z, it's like still like this tech fatigue. So it really played on all those sorts of different levels of who I was personally and professionally.
With us being at the Oakland LGBTQ Center, we never closed. So everything we did was just like David stated, a million Zoom meetings. At that time, we just got a grant for rental assistance. So it was a lot of people that when everything shut down, their jobs shut down. And a lot of the jobs that shut down were jobs that you can't transfer to. It's not like you can just go move to Seattle with that mom and pop shop or, those type of stores. So we were helping a lot of people, and it was a lot of people in need of rental assistance. We opened our clinic recently with all the services that we need with them. It was a lot. But like job wise, it transitioned the kids. So me being a youth coordinator, it was a big, huge difference from having 15 to 20 kids in a room every week versus 2 or 3 coming because they're in virtual learning. Everyone's schedules was like everywhere, from the middle school kids to the high school kids, and even some of the college clients that I have. It was like hectic, but it was something that was definitely an eye opener. I learned a lot about needing self-care. Just because we were at home, doing our work remotely, it doesn't mean that we don't have self-care. So it's kind of like you have to make sure that your work is getting done. You're helping the people in need, but you also have to make sure that you're okay. We can't be advocating for, mental health and things to be a better, place and state where we're not in the right state of mind to do so. So it was a challenge, but nothing that we all could not conquer.
You're right. We're here right now. Thank goodness. Thanks so much for sharing. Juan.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here. Personally, for me, it really did impact my own mental health. I thought I was a mix of an extrovert and introvert, but turns out I'm very much an extroverted person, and I needed my social time. In addition to that, I didn't get my graduation ceremony. And as a first generation student, that really impacted my way because it's something that not only I was working towards too, but I thought I owed that to my family. And even though I did graduate, I wanted them to have that moment. So that brought up a lot of feelings, and I dealt with it in ways that weren't as healthy, but I believe in just reflecting. And once I reflected, I was able to get back into healthy coping mechanisms, whether it was working out and more. But what I also learned was to be grateful for things that maybe prior to the pandemic I took for granted. Grateful for the food on the table, grateful for the work that I do, because the work that we're doing is very much necessary. I currently work as the regional manager for the CalHope Warm Line for the state of California. And throughout my job there, I've heard many stories of people calling in need of support. And just the fact that people are taking that first step to reach out for support, for help, for guidance to resources says a lot of the state of our world. People want the help, and making sure that people have the adequate resources is something that we should all be striving to do.
I'm kind of curious because we've talked a little bit already about, the role that Zoom and other social media or online media or whatever has played. And of course, we're doing this program through a mixture of Zoom and YouTube and Facebook and such. And obviously for the club, it's allowed us to continue existing for the past year. I'm interested in the role that these kinds of, video chats and talks and such have done from the mental health point of view, both in either creating a distance between people who otherwise would be in the same room, or maybe being able to talk to people that they wouldn't otherwise get to see and such. So if maybe each of you could kind of talk a little bit about, the role that it's played, perhaps positively or negatively from this point of view.
As far as Zoom meetings go, it depends on what the duration of the Zoom meeting is. Sometimes we'll have Zoom meetings for 30 minutes, an hour, but it's been times where I've had to be required to be on Zoom for a full 8-hour day for some type of training because we weren't physically able to go inside of the building for training. So for me, like I said before, it's very challenging to have to be on Zoom for 8 hours. it's different, when you're inside of a building, you can go out and go grab some Starbucks and come back. But with Zoom, it's like they want you to be on camera. You have to be, semi-perfect. It is draining. I have to agree with Juan as far as the introvert extrovert thing goes. I am, half and half when it comes to that. But sometimes I would rather just be in a regular room with everyone and just having that social time to actually engage with people. It's kind of like all of us are kind of socially awkward to a certain extent. We were so used to being able to stop and give our friends hugs and things of that nature. Now it's kind of like, I don't know. Are you vaccinated? Or, what's going on? Like you have to, give them an elbow handshake, so to speak. So yeah, it's a challenge, but it's just something that has to be done. And now everyone knows that you can work from home, as you can see with the pandemic. So yeah.
I agree. I believe that the in-person report is necessary. However, I also think that just online Zoom meetings, events has been able to bridge a gap in terms of making them more accessible for many people who might not have transportation, who might have to stay at home to take care of their children. I believe that it bridges that gap and it makes our event today even more accessible for others who might not be able to access it.
I would say I think Juan and Shorty nailed it. The one piece that I would like to add, though, is for mental health providers. There's an interesting note. Before the pandemic, we all know I work for Blue Shield of California. So before the pandemic, about 4% of behavioral health contacts was via telehealth. And last summer, now it's about 70% of mental health appointments are conducted over telehealth. And part of that isn't just the shift of the person who's getting therapy. There's been a huge attitude shift among behavioral health providers who now feel much more comfortable providing therapy over a screen. Even when I was a therapist, it was like, if you don't have the person in the room, how do you really get to know somebody and build that rapport and build that relationship? But we're seeing more and more that people can have more therapy out, like who can have more, they can provide more treatment, and people can have greater access to treatment than they perceive themselves to be able to have before. So I think in that way, it can be really, really great. If you can also manage the fatigue, Shorty, as you were saying that, I was like, when I probably spend 7 hours a day in Zoom meetings just because I'm constantly in meetings. But like, we have to give each other permission to like get up and walk around the room if you need to, have some camera off time during the meeting if you need to, like little tricks like if I'm having a one-on-one meeting, make the window with that person's face smaller than it would be in real life, because it's just weird to have like this giant face on your screen that you're talking to, right? So it just like little tricks in here and there that we've had to learn.
I'll jump in and add mine. I mean, I had to see an optometrist this past weekend. I've been suffering from dry eyes for about 2 weeks now. And so my eyes are stinging and they're red and they're irritated. And we ruled out some of the serious stuff that I was afraid of. But what we agreed upon between the doctor and I was that my eyes are screaming for some rest. So from recovery and some rest. So think about that too. If you are experiencing Zoom fatigue, I want to shift our attention to talking about the LGBTQ community as a whole and how the pandemic may have affected our community. I heard, Shorty, you had mentioned some things about folks who might be experiencing homelessness. Obviously, we're talking about mental health, and the data is new, right? We're still figuring this out. We don't know exactly how this has affected our community, but I can think of many things, even for myself, like dealing with as an LGBTQ person, going through the pandemic, not filthy rich, and also an AAPI person, also a woman. There's just a lot of things that I could list of how the pandemic affected me. But let's talk about how this has affected our community in general and what you might be seeing. So add some data or even share, some notes that you may have. We'll start with David.
Sure, thanks. In terms of like long-term impacts you can't know until you're looking retrospectively, right? And being able to look meta back over how things shifted over time, and like how did that wound turn into a scar? How did the scar heal? And how do you have that long impacting? Do you have a long-term injury, or do you just have a scar that you'll always remember? And that's kind of how trauma goes. When we think about LGBTQ folks, for example, I think I was going to say we. I certainly can't speak for and no one can speak for an LGBTQ community or LGBTQ communities. We're all just individuals. But I think that if you speak with many members, it's like there's there's quite a sensitivity to what's going on in the world around us for groups that aren't getting treated the right way. So when we think about the year of COVID, there was also an incredibly emotional election going on. There was this renewed understanding or focus upon racial injustice. And there were just so many other things going on all at the same time. So we call that really like a complex community experience of trauma. In 2016, when there was the massacre at the Pulse nightclub in Florida, where 49 people were killed, I live in California. I've never been to that club in Florida, but somehow those were my people too. So like there's an impact of like when something happens to your community. It's like if there's a shooting at a church or a mosque or a synagogue, how it's like people who are from those communities kind of feel like those are my people. When I think about COVID and just the year of 2020, there's almost like a camaraderie of like a war weariness almost of like things I feel like where that we, even though we were apart and isolated, this happened to all of us. And so I think that sense of community, like this is Pride season, right? When we're supposed to be able to go out onto the street and experience that sense of community in ways that are pretty unique. I think that there's a sense of bringing together and also this shared trauma experience and survivorship that will last for quite some time.
Shorty?
For our community, like David said, it's Pride. Last year was the first time ever that we could not go to Pride. And me being an artist, it was like, oh my God, I can't perform at Pride. This is crazy. And everyone's like, so what are they going to do? And everyone's like, oh, well, I think it's going to be virtual. It was like the togetherness was like just sad. It was so sad, the fact that we could not meet together, because with SF Pride, it's huge. Millions of people come all across the world. That's the time where people that, that you've met during the years of being in the community, they're coming from New York. They're coming from Australia. You get to see your friends that you never normally get to see. And that sense of friendship and that distance kind of like shattered that. And it took an effect on the nightlife of the LGBTQ community as well. Like one of the clubs that was in Oakland, it just shut down. It's closed. There's a lot of things that you couldn't do. So going to work, if you were able and blessed to be able to go to work every day, and coming home was just, that was it. The only place you would typically go was the grocery store or the gas station. And that was your life. So if you were a person like me, that's a super workaholic, I never was able to ever binge watch anything until the pandemic. So it's like, it was challenging, overall, but it was also like depressing in a sense of not being able to see your peers and see how they're doing and not be able to even just engage with them, have a conversation. We couldn't even sit down at a restaurant and eat. That's like Juan said, just having the normal things that we take for granted taken away from us was like really crucial. So it was a big step in us working towards being back to normal, so to speak, is something that I'm looking forward to, but it's also still scary because, of the way of the world. Everyone's not vaccinated. Everyone doesn't believe in that. And it's just we can't get everyone to comply to one thing because everyone is their own person and they have their own beliefs. But as a community, this is a great time for us to come together and stand together and show support to one another at this time.
And Juan.
Yes, thank you. I want to focus on young people in particular for this and their lack of safe spaces. For many young people who were now going to class virtually through Zoom at home, maybe their home wasn't a safe space for them. So having that extra anxiety of being in a place where you feel like you don't belong was really damaging to one's mental health. And it's what I've heard throughout numerous conversations throughout the work that I do at the Warm Line and more. And recently, the Trevor Project released their annual survey, which notes that 42% of the LGBTQ plus youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. And as you can imagine, those rates are increased for people of color due to the numerous other factors that they are working for or against, right? I believe that David mentioned all of the fight for racial equity, which is great. But it also impacted young people of color who belong to the LGBTQ plus community who maybe couldn't even focus on their struggle as an LGBTQ plus person because they were trying to survive for who they were and for their race, for their color, whatever it might have been. So oftentimes with mental health, it's more of a luxury for many young people than a necessity. And what we are trying to do is to make sure that people are taking care of this, to make sure that they are aware that this is something that they shouldn't ignore, but it's what historically many people do. They ignore it and it continues and it continues to develop more and more. And that is why throughout the system, we have more people reaching a crisis point because we're not focusing on preventative care or because people just simply cannot afford to care after their mental health due to the numerous other concerns that they are dealing with on their day-to-day lives. So those are some things that I believe COVID really had an impact with throughout the LGBTQ plus community, in particular for young people.
And Juan, you mentioned the Trevor Project's national survey on LGBTQ youth mental health for 2021. Another one of the little data points from that kind of jumped out at me was 94% of LGBTQ youth reported that recent politics negatively impacted their mental health. And when we're talking about the pandemic year, we're also talking about a year that was absolutely off the charts bonkers politically. I mean, even when it was over with the election, we found out it wasn't over. Could you talk a bit about the role that played on people and how they dealt with it or didn't deal with it? I mean, I was a politically involved kid. So when I was young, I would have been talking about this to my parents and my friends, but I know that I was a weird kid. What are the the normal LGBTQ kids that you know and you're dealing with? How are they dealing with? How did they deal with that year? And I do hope they know that it's not normal. That was not a normal year.
Yeah, what I often identify throughout the work is that for politics with the LGBTQ plus community in particular, it's part of our existence. Oftentimes our existence is political for whatever reason. And oftentimes we have to fight for rights. And it's something that many people are still doing to this day, because even though gay marriage is legal in the States, there's many states who are still discriminating against LGBTQ plus people. And I believe that for many people, especially who were advocating during last year's political climate, it was out of a need for survival. And, especially as advocates, you try to use your platform in a conscious and intentional way. And it does take a toll on you. And as we've been noting, oftentimes people don't take care of their mental health and don't address the toll these situations have had on them until years from now. And that is why even with this data that we have currently, it is not representative, because these things take years to develop. And if it's not addressed, it goes into a crisis point. For many, I come from an immigrant family myself. I came to this country at the age of 2. So getting involved into politics has also been a part of my existence, and just being a very outspoken person politically, because that is how our community has survived throughout the years. And, we talk about resilience often, but I bet you anything that many LGBTQ plus young people do not want to be resilient all the time, because it is exhausting. It's a lot of emotional labor. And I believe that we can sell things as resilient and put a nice title to it. But it's really like, wow, you've been through a lot. And many people would say, I would have rather not been through that. So I believe that the focus on advocating for political causes for LGBTQ plus mental health is more about to ensure that we change the system and that we're able to have young people getting the appropriate resources and support that they need early on.
Thank you. Shorty, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Juan. Me being a youth coordinator, a lot of this political stuff on TV, it gets to these kids. It really does. They have those discussions with their friends. And sometimes, things are different now from when I was a kid. We didn't have social media as a kid. It was if something happened, you had to be there or you just heard the story. But with these kids, they're influenced. They're easily influenced by decisions that people make. And sometimes I've seen some of the kids have one kid might be for, Donald Trump, or another kid might be for Joe Biden and those type of things. And that kid ruin friendships, even in adults. But as far as the youth goes, they're kind of like pulled in to these type of things. It's like blasted on CNN. It's everywhere on their social media. These days, you don't even have to watch the news to know what's going on. You can just go to Facebook and just see what happened. And you're just like, hey, did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? So it affects them, especially in their household. No matter what they may feel or what they may think, they might live in a household where they have to deal with that. If their parents believe one thing politically, that's all they know, So sometimes the kids, they have a mind of their own and they have that power to where they say, no, I don't believe in that. This is wrong. This is right. But sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. I don't think people talk to kids about political things enough, like face to face. They just rely on whatever the television tells them. And we should also have those conversations. Like, it should happen. They should be included in those conversations of decisions that are being made, because a lot of those decisions, they do need a kid's point of view, because we don't know what these youth go through until they express to us how they feel.
Thanks. David?
Yeah, I completely agree with Shorty and Juan. I was responsible for clinical programs when I worked at the Trevor Project in 2016. It was as what I was thinking about, because I was just talking about the Pulse shooting, and that within 24 hours of the night of the Pulse shooting, we had the highest volume calls to our crisis line that the Trevor Project had ever had since 1998 when it began. That got out, well, how to say, that was the highest call volume we had at any single 24-hour period until November, the night of the election. It had double the call volume. Now, what's interesting, is I'm not going to say that the results of the presidential election caused so many people to go into suicidal crisis. However, I will say that the results of that election were so emotionally impactful for so many people who didn't have a friend or someone at home to talk to about it, and they had to call a crisis line to have that conversation, because like Shorty said, and like Juan said, it was like maybe they didn't have those protective factors in the home. They didn't have a father or a mother or any parent or an aunt or uncle or a big brother or sister that they could have this conversation with about how they were feeling. They had to call a hotline for it. And calling hotline is good. It's not a bad thing, but I'm just saying that usually that's something that you do when you don't have someone in your right away life to have that conversation with. So when we think about during COVID, maybe you're someone who was a college age student and you grew up small town and you grew up smaller town approach to LGBTQ identities. And you're like, oh, I got to go to school in Austin. And you go away to college, or, you're in Austin, you're in Chicago or something like that. You get to spend a year in college, and then you come home and it's like, I can't wait to go back there where people get me and I see a community and there's a city, and like they actually have a bar for people like me, or when I say bar, like they have, a club or something like that for people who are more like me. And then you go back to small town where you don't have access to those kinds of, I call them resources. It's like you don't have get, LGBTQ safe spaces to go, and then you were stuck there at home for another year after you just experienced it, and you had to have these conversations. So I think we see increase in like youth homelessness, LGBTQ youth homelessness, because of that refugee mentality where it's like they're escaping this bad situation at home. So I want to say that, though, however, there is a great deal of resilience as well. I think we talk about some of the vulnerabilities and the challenges that are faced upon LGBTQ populations, and particularly youth. However, we're also talking about a groups of people, communities of people that can be outrageously resilient, because we've got the street cred of having gone through so much like bad stuff too, that some of the stuff like we figure out how to deal with in ways that other people don't need to figure it out. So that I think the issue is that there always is someone to help. There are always these like the places, like if you know where to go or if you know where to call, then there are people who care and that can be very helpful, and that can help us and can help each other to get through this, just as we have gotten through so many other things. So I certainly don't want to, and I don't think that anyone here has that desire to. I don't want to like go through the narrative of like, oh, poor LGBTQ populations, they suffer so much and they don't know how, and they're so vulnerable, without really talking about that resilience on top of it as well, which definitely exists.
Thank you for that, David. It's a great segue to what I want to say, and then also Juan, for reminding us also how much LGBTQ people do actually go through. When I was going through COVID-19 or the pandemic and going through my own situation, right? All I've ever known since coming out is fighting, for my existence, fighting back, fighting for marriage, fighting for status, fighting for access to resources. And so my reaction was very much like, you're just going to fight through it, in which, to the point where I didn't even recognize or know that I probably needed help. I needed someone to talk to. I started experiencing things like what felt like panic attacks. I don't know if they actually were, because I didn't, get a doctor to diagnose that, or just felt like I couldn't breathe, or I felt like my senses were sensitive all of a sudden. So, for example, witnessing the tear gassing out in downtown Oakland of protesters during the George Floyd protests, and all that made me kind of, just sensitive to sound. And on the other side of that, though, when seeing Black trans queer women out there on the streets alongside other protesters and fighting back and talking about, our own courage, our own resilience, that gave me a sense of safety too. That made me feel like everything's going to be okay. That was a really long way of saying, I think for LGBTQ people, sometimes we might forget about ourselves because we're always constantly fighting for ourselves. When do you stop and say, I think I need to talk to someone? Or what are some things that we could look for as individuals that might give you, a heads up that seeking help is probably the right thing to do, and you probably need to look for it now? So give us some examples, or share with us what you think, for those out there who have the fight mentality, these are some things that you might be able to look for if you think you need help. We'll start with Juan.
Yeah, I think I ideally start when you start feeling bad, like there's something's wrong. I know that for me, that started when I was in middle school, and I kept it to myself because I didn't want to be another stressor for my parents, even though a child should never feel that way. And it wasn't their intention. I just knew that they were working day and night to make sure that we were taken care of. I believe in asking for help early on can be really life-changing for people, because as I said before, it will continue to develop. You'll continue feeling worse down the way if you just try and put it in a box and ignore it, because it'll resurface at some point. I believe in self-empowerment. I work in peer support, and I believe that the individual needs to feel ready. I don't believe in people taking anyone anywhere to receive the support that they need. I believe that the individual has to have that determination and self-empowerment to seek that support. And if you're a parent watching this and you don't know how to deal with your LGBTQ plus child, or how to talk about their mental health, I believe in fostering a safe space at home, having affirming messages in your home, letting them know like, hey, here's a resource if you want to share it with a friend, but maybe they'll be that friend that they need it, right? And just having things accessible to them and knowing that they have someone to go to is important. But I do believe seeking for help when you start feeling bad. For me, it was my stomach was hurting. I was trying to avoid school, and I knew why, but I did not want to share the why yet at that point. But I believe that once you know why you're feeling that way, or you're trying to understand the why behind it, having someone to guide you through it is extremely important.
Shorty?
I experienced that as a kid. I didn't know how to express myself. I used to get into things that I shouldn't have gotten into, as far as going to school, maybe getting into it with my teacher or my peers or something like that. I just didn't have an outlet. And back then, I never knew what, in third grade, you don't know what therapy is. The kids that would act out in school, they would just name it as a temper tantrum. They never really had that communication of asking the kid, like, what's wrong? It's okay to speak your mind and speak up, because every kid has a different personality. Some kids are timid, some people are shy, some kids are outgoing, and some of them aren't. But it's just about knowing your power, knowing that you have that power. But as a kid growing up, you had those programs like Big Brother and Big Sister, and you had DARE, for them to come to your class and tell you about not to do drugs and things of that nature. You had those things, and a lot of these programs aren't available. I used to go to an after school program called Break the Cycle. It would be different kids from different grades, and we'll all be there getting tutored by UC Berkeley students. I don't see things like that anymore. And those are those are the things that you learn, your social existence by being around different cultures and different people, in learning and having mentors. So for me, it's just about having that strength. And sometimes people don't find their why, like they were saying earlier, because they don't have anybody to look up to. We had, people that we idolized as kids. Like, my idol was Michael Jackson. Like, there's no other Michael Jackson, but I just feel like that's how it is. That's how it is. That's how I can think of now. Just finding your power, finding your you, and finding your why. And it's very important that they do that. And we have to, as mentors and counselors and coordinators, we have to instill that in them and let them know, like, hey, we're here for you. Those hotlines are important. These programs are very important, and things like this, having a platform for us to express that, hey, we know there's issues there. We know that there's things going on in the world, and we're here, we're aware of it, and we're here to help you get help. And we're here for ourselves to get help as well, together. That's just basically what we need to do, have everything together.
Thank you. And David, I know I tossed out there a couple of things that I was experiencing, but would love to hear from you as a behavioral therapist, right? And kind of when to address, or what you can look for as far as some signs that maybe it's time to ask for help.
Sure. And thanks, Michelle, for that one too. So I think, first of all, take an inventory of the people in your life is where I would start. So you take an inventory of people who care about you and people who are kind to you, and consider taking out of that list when you're thinking about where to go for help. Take a real honest look with yourself about who on that list might also be a little toxic in your life, and make sure that that's not the person that you're spending a whole lot of time with. Maybe they need you too, but when you need something, if you think about it for a minute, who's toxic in your life and who you might need to spend a little bit less time with. But if you think about who cares about you, who's kind to you, and who gets you, and hopefully there are some people that you can put on that list for those concepts. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's some people at school, maybe it's some people, maybe it's even like consider teachers, or consider other adults in your life as well as other people your own age in your life. Now, some people will absolutely say, I have gone through every person I have ever met, and there's nobody I would put on that inventory of people who care about me and who are kind to me. And we get that. And like, I get that too. At that point, consider if you don't have people in your life who really get you and know how to be helpful for you, consider talking to a therapist. Once you're over the age of 12, you are allowed to consent to your own mental health treatment. In most situations, people don't necessarily know how to access it. So talk to a counselor at school, talk to a teacher, and there are professionals around here who know how to do that and can help you figure it out. And it doesn't always have to be professional therapy either. There are all sorts of different kinds of counselors and people who are therapy-like who can be helpful in your life. There are lots of like peer counselors who can do a much better job at helping you through something than a professional psychologist can for certain things. I would also say we have the LGBTQIA plus COVID support guide that Blue Shield has put out, and it's accessible to everybody. I think I think there's a slide on it will show up later, but that's accessible to anybody, and that's at bluesky.blueshieldca.com. Take a look. It's like 4 pages. It's got some great tips and just things about how to consider your own mental health. But you got to choose. You have to choose behaviors. You can't choose how you feel, but you can choose sometimes like how you think about it, how you respond to things most of the time. If it's a learned skill, but you can make those choices. So it's kind of like I was talking before, is like, yeah, when COVID happened, my alcohol consumption went up. I had to check myself on that and bring it back down. So you gotta have kind of an awareness of what's going on with you and be able to figure that out. But I'm sorry, I've gone on and on. The question was like how to know when to ask for help. And I think it's that point of like, when you feel like, if someone's not getting you and that's what you need, I think that's a good point. You're not paying a therapist to care about you. Therapists get paid, like they have a skill set to understand and get you and to figure out how to solve things alongside you.
I'm glad you mentioned the guide. If our video team could put up the slide we have there showing some self-care help and other resources. Let's take that then in the direction of specifically, what are some self-help things that people, or self-care things that youth can do? Maybe start again with you, David.
Well, I think the number one thing I would do is consider your self-care and your support network. Legit take an inventory of it. Make sure you've got those phone numbers in your phone. And when you're having lows, remember that you actually do have someone to call who cares about you. And if you don't have that person readily available in your life, then you can text start to 741-741 and start a crisis text line conversation with somebody who's going to be there 24/7. Just have that conversation when you need. Just make sure you've got that. The other one is, of course, just being intentional about making healthy choices, like I talked about a couple of times. And when you're in a good space, prep for when you're in a low space. Because when you're in a low space is the hardest time to problem solve. So when you're like, I actually know what to do to help myself feel better most of the time, and take a legit inventory, make yourself a list, write those things down. Because when you're at your low, you remember to look at that thing and actually do the things that you said would help you to feel better.
Nicely put. Shorty, any thoughts about self-care?
I think that I'm a big advocate for self-care. I think everyone needs self-care, period. I feel like the things that I do for self-care before the pandemic, I was going to a massage therapist once a month, making sure that I'm okay. Right now I'm going to like a chiropractor. I got injured, but I think if I never would have got injured, I never would have went to a chiropractor. But as far as like just taking those walks, just if you get up in the morning, just take a walk, clear your head. Sometimes you might not need to bring your headphones to listen to music. I downloaded an app called Calm. I was having trouble sleeping at night because of everything that was going on in the world and just life in general. the Calm app has people on there that speak to you like they're like therapists, and they have like soft, warm music that you can play, just to calm yourself down. And they have these exercises, like breathing exercises. I think working out is a good thing to do for self-care, because during quarantine, I was just eating everything under the sun. So everyone said, you have that quarantine body, because that's what happens. Working out is good. Reading, that is something that a lot of us don't have time for, to the point where you're just getting like your book on tape. Like you're listening to your book while you are taking that job. You have to figure out different avenues and different ways to multitask. But I honestly feel like you should find who you really are, your true self. I like candles, so candles are good. Sage is good. To sage your house, sage your office, sage everything. I just think sage is good for the soul. And just being happy, finding what makes you happy. I would do things as an outlet. Like I have a clothing line, so I would take some of the clothes that I would have. I will bleach them, or I would get paint and I'll paint them. Or I ordered a whole bunch of canvases from Amazon, and I was just going out on my balcony and just painting. So if you find something, extracurricular activity to do that is fun, it might not even, involve your friends. It might just be something for you. Just make sure you have time for yourself. I think that's very important for everybody, especially these youth. They need that, because they're like consumed with all these Zooms and, what's in and what's out, and, bullying and what's popular. So they need to have an outlet.
Thank you, Shorty. And Juan.
Well, I agree with everything everybody said, but I also believe in boundaries, setting boundaries, and making sure that I'm being intentional on those boundaries. I believe that self-care for me is respecting myself. That means respecting my time, respecting myself with the people I surround myself with, taking myself out of toxic environments and saying no to people or things when I don't want to do things, or when I feel like I don't have the capacity. I believe in reflecting and practicing gratitude and listening to music and setting mantras for myself. One of the ones I always use is I am more than one moment. And for me, that means I am more than one moment of success, of me feeling okay, and I'm more than one moment of failure or me feeling challenged. And I believe that helps me stay grounded throughout the day. And it's what's been propelling me to continue on throughout my journey in advocacy.
Thank you all for sharing those self-care tips. We actually do have a video and then some resources to share with you. And so just cueing our production team here to play the short video and the slide of resources that we have for you before we end the program. Thank you so much for that. And so as we wind down, I think, a couple things Juan had mentioned earlier was, talking about our community as a whole, LGBTQ, and the issues that we face, and, just this road that we have to walk. And there was something that you said, Juan, about, we have to change the system. Like, it shouldn't always be so hard. And while I appreciate our strength and our courage and our resilience as a community, because it almost feels like nothing could really stop us or break us, we're always going to overcome these challenges as a community. I'd love to hear from all of you and maybe some messages that you might have for our community as we come out of this pandemic. I mean, some of us are still experiencing the violence. Some of us are experiencing, really hard times, really hard challenges. Some of us are still grieving the people that we lost due to the pandemic. And so if you could just share, what is that system? What is changing that system? What does a point in which, LGBTQ people do not have to struggle, like what does that mean, especially coming out of a pandemic? We'll start with Shorty.
I think coming together would be a good strategy. A lot of times people feel as though, like for me, for example, they say, "Oh, Black Lives Matter." There are some people that it's only for specific people. It's not for LGBTQ. We always have to let them know, like, all Black lives matter, not just, the heterosexual aspect of it. Sometimes LGBTQ people are overlooked for things. And if you never speak up about it and you never bring it to people's attention, then it will never get solved. So I think basically people coming together as one and having a better open mind of things and not being so like secluded and so stuck in the old ancient days, I think people need to grow and grow with the times. Everyone's not the same. You might find someone that is, was born in the 70s. There's no way that they can compare to someone that was born in the 90s. They are like, ancestors to them. They would have to be, mentors and people that would guide that millennial age bracket. I believe that one thing that has occurred at the Oakland LGBTQ Center, I was able to be into a group with the elders and just sit in their session in their group. And it was amazing to listen to their stories. It's not every day that you see the youth engaging with the elderly. And I think that will change a lot of things as well. So I just think that everyone should be open-minded. Everyone should speak their mind and particularly listen to others. And even if they're not believing in what they're saying, or just if they have their own beliefs and things, I think that they should just listen and hear them out. I think communication is very much so key with everything. More communication.
Juan?
I believe in taking yourself out of it and focusing on the community, right? Because a lot of times people only want to attend to their specific needs. As I said previously, many people think that because LGBTQ plus marriage is legal in the States, that means that everything is okay on their end, because maybe topics like racial equity doesn't directly impact them. And in this country in particular, when you have trans women of color being murdered at such high rates every single year, there needs to be a focus around that as a collective, as a true community. And oftentimes there's a lot of differences within your own in-group that occur. And I believe that if we focus on the bigger picture, remind each other of the why are we doing this, and not make it about just one side of the community, but rather the whole, and fighting for each other every single time, and not just when it's something that directly impacts a certain sector of the community. I believe in having those proactive conversations, listening to one another. Oftentimes people just talk at one another. There's no learning. There's no true intention to want to support one another. And I believe in just being intentional, proactive, and making sure that you're attending to all of your brothers, your sisters, your non-binaries, et cetera, within the community. It's important to focus on the whole community.
And David.
Thanks. So just Shorty, I appreciate what you said about intergenerational components here too. I think that there's so much progress to be celebrated, and that there's so much progress to be made, but there's such an opportunity for us to respect the people who came before us too. It's like the things that we're fighting for now are things that we're talking about access to healthcare. We're talking about access to equitable healthcare. We're talking about trans girls getting to play on women's sports teams. I mean, I was born in the 70s. And when I was growing up in junior high and high school, there were no LGBTQ people on TV at all. Not Will and Grace, not Ellen, zero. There was Pedro on The Real World 3, and he was dying of AIDS. And so that was the only media concept, and people didn't, there was no social media, there was no internet really. Well, internet was invented while I was in high school. I think that concept of because people fought to not be arrested for wearing a dress, later on people could fight to be able to hold hands in public without being arrested or beaten up or threatened, to later be able to fight to be able to marry the person you love, to be able to fight to be on a gender affirming and appropriate sports team. It was the fight keeps evolving to be something different and different and different. And I think that it's very, very important to respect that Pride, as it is Pride season, is really to respect all of the progress that has been made by LGBTQ communities, and to give that respect and name those people who have led us through previous challenges, so that we can fight the fights that need fighting today.
Speaking of evolution and hopefully improvement, but specifically on the coming out of the pandemic and on mental health and LGBTQ youth, do you think as a result of what we all went through in the pandemic, that the services and the advice and the opportunities that are there, kind of, if you will, the mental health infrastructure is better as a result of having gone through the pandemic, and it's better able to address needs? Or did we really just kind of go through 15 years where we kind of realized, 15 months where we realized a lot of the gaps in the system or things that we weren't able to address with it? Any thoughts on that? Stick with me, David.
I think it's more accessible. A lot of therapists were definitely coming out of retirement, just like a lot of these nurses and doctors were coming out of retirement when people were quitting the hospital, oh, I can't do this, I'm not doing this. So as far as saying better, I think it really helped being able to call your therapist on Zoom, being able to speak to someone over the phone, the communication, because it was forced. We were forced to wear a mask, wear gloves, have social distancing. So we didn't have a choice but to say, hey, you know what? I have to call my therapist on Zoom. This is something that has to happen. And you couldn't really have an excuse to be like, oh, I can't go to my therapy session. Why not? You're at home. We're shut in. Why can't you get on Zoom today? What's going on? So I think the access to it was definitely a change in a good way. It had a lot of more people realizing, you know what? I think I might need to just talk to a therapist. Let's see what's going on with this anxiety. Let me check on my mental health. I think something's wrong, but I don't know what to call it. I'm not quite sure. People were more comfortable admitting that they need some type of help and some type of structure. And so I think it helped a little bit more than it would have just on a regular basis. So it did put a dent in it. I can agree to that.
It would look like you had something to say.
I did. I got excited. Shorty kind of touched on it too. I think a huge thing that happened during the pandemic was it took a giant chunk out of stigma in talking about how we're doing. It was like the whole world took a giant punch in the chest, but we all took a punch in the chest, so we were allowed to talk to each other about it. And just metaphorically, and young people do such a better job. Gen Z is the first generation, and millennials too, but to be able to talk about mental health, you scroll through TikTok, I mean, there's people talking about their anxiety and their depression and their ADHD and so forth, to mass audiences without all of the stigma associated with it, and just kind of hey, and people are seeing it and they're yeah, that's me too. I'm struggling like that too. And that whole I'm the only one and I'm alone and isolated, that's really getting wedged away at. Now, if we can actually get all those folks to the help that they need because we're capable of talking about it, I think that we'll see, we should continue to see that positive impact.
Juan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with them. I do believe that, resources are more accessible now, and it bridged that gap now having them virtually, as we were talking about in terms of peer support groups, et cetera. But I also think that we don't need just more accessibility to resources. We need intentional resources. I believe that you can create how many ever resources you want and put up a poster with butterflies and rainbows that states this is a safe space. But if it's not true to that nature, and if we don't have actual measures of how people are measuring that these resources work for everybody and that they're truly a safe space for LGBTQ plus young people, et cetera, the system won't change. So I do believe that there's that room for growth in terms of resources that people are being presented to with right now. And if we're talking about young people in particular, I believe there's a need for more preventative mental health resources, more education in school about this. And whether it's putting more phone lines in your syllabus when you're presenting to your campus at the start of the year, I believe all of that can be truly life-saving to many people.
Hopefully the powers that be are watching this, or they'll watch it soon and they'll hear you on, and that's a great idea. Well, let's end on a positive note. Share very quickly one thing that you're excited about, as we kind of get out of this pandemic, or maybe it's just something that we are moving forward, you're moving forward to, you're working on something. Share one thing that you're excited about. David, let's start with you.
I live in San Diego, and our Pride is at the end of July, so we actually get one this year. So we don't. I mean, there isn't going to be the big festival or whatnot, but I think that because things are opened up, people are going to be out celebrating in one way or another. And I'm fortunate to live in a big city, so I get to go and be a part of that. I think I'm very, very excited about that.
Juan?
I'm excited to continue my work, to continue doing hopefully in-person events now at this point and not just Zoom events. But personally, I'm excited to just go out with my friends, have a good time, and do the things I was doing before the pandemic started, and try to have as much fun as I can this summer.
And Shorty?
Starting new ventures. Me being an influencer as well, it's a challenge, and like David was saying, the TikTok it's very influential as far as like the stigma he stated. Like, it's different now, so I want to be able to encourage people to speak their mind and express their feelings without feeling like they're going to get backlash or someone's going to laugh at them or get bullied. We're going to deal with things like that, but I just want to work on new ventures, find new activities to do. Like Juan said, get back to going out with my friends, having fun, being in the social settings, and just enjoying life. That's pretty much what I want to do, and get back to my pre-quarantine weight.
Well, I want to thank you all for being with us today and for being a part of this program on recovery and resilience in the LGBTQ community after a pandemic. Thanks to all of you at home joining us. For more information, I do think that you need to follow all three of our speakers today. We had David Bond, T. Drake Smith, aka Shorty, and Juan Acosta. And so, John, it's tradition here where you end the show.
I'll take it away. And thanks again to all of our special guests on this Michelle Meow show at the Commonwealth Club of California. Thanks to all of you for watching or listening to this program. And again, thank you to Blue Shield of California for making the program possible. Feel free to share this video with your friends, family, and others in your network. You can find more programs at commonwealthclub.org/MMS. Stay safe and have a good week. Bye.